Shaping the Future of Architecture and Urbanism. Today's session focuses on a crucial and timely topic, innovation to address climate change, through a thought provoking panel discussion. Our panelists are renowned architect Ashok Lal and sustainability expert Gagandeep Bular, moderated by architect Prasad Vaidya, who leads Solar Decathlon India and Sustainable Energy Labs at IIHS. We are honored to have you all join us for this transformative dialogue. To commence today's proceedings, I invite Professor Aparna Surve, Dean of D.Y. Patil School of Architecture and the co-convener of the conference Transformation 2025, to deliver the introductory speech. Professor Aparna Surve, over to you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Welcome, esteemed panelists, architect Ashok Lal, Gagandeep, and our friend and mentor, Prasad Vaidya. So I know what you're going to be speaking about is something we are eagerly awaiting. But I think speaking about the backdrop in which this is being spoken would serve kind of direction for the attendees and even for us. Hence, I'll be taking a few minutes. So we are deemed to be D.Y. Patil deemed to be university. We have 30 plus years of existence, and many of our alumni are across India and globe. They are doing different kinds of work. Many of them are also pursuing sustainability practices and engaging with the latest issues and technology and so on and so forth. Um, we are blessed to have a very interesting and legendary architect's intervention here right across our building where we sit, in form of Center of Excellence designed by Foster Plus Partner, which is a platinum rated green building, IGBC green building. And us are lucky to have the experience of this building day in and day out. Um, so, among multiple themes that we were considering for the conference, disruptive technologies and its impact on architecture, design, and urbanism also came from a very important lead from the Council of Architecture President, Professor Abhay Purohit. And we quickly thought maybe it's something that we need to address it now for the future. And we started looking at many, so these are our patrons. Abhay Purohit, Chief Patron as President, Council of Architecture. Our visionary leader, Dr. Vijay D. Patil, who was instrumental in bringing Foster Partners and transforming the campus and the entire discourse, not only for the School of Architecture, for the entire university. Dr. Vijay D. Patil, convener, Jayashree Deshpande ma'am, myself, and R.K. Oberajan. This has been the team which is very active. We are joined by the conference advisors, Vice President Gajanan Ramji, members, all members of Executive Council, Kiran Mahajani, Pradyumna Vyas, Srivatsan, Dr. Srivatsan and Tushar Sogani as conference advisors. And we are very lucky to have eminent scientific committee who has been really helping us for more than 7-8 months on various topics, selection of jurors, I mean speakers and panelists and so on and so forth. Professor Anuruddha Paul, Krishnamurthy, Dr. Mathilde from II, I'm not IHS, I'm just IAC, Nuru Karim, Architect Prasad Vaidya, Dr. Sanjeev Vidyarthi, Professor Sergio Pota, and Swaraj Dattagupta. So it's a very multidisciplinary team, very geared towards the conference topic. We have publication advisors coming from Council of Architecture's esteemed head of the institutions, Dr. Nandini Kulkarni, Professor Binamul Tom, and a core committee comprising of extremely driven, focused, and enthusiastic faculty members whose names have been listed here, and many more faculty have begun taking many more responsibilities. I think this team has come up with a lot of deliberations and a manthan before we actually uh, uh, introduce these themes to the public. So when the disruptive technologies as a subject came, we thought of putting it in four different themes. The first theme looks at the idea of evolution of disruptions through time, through various disruptions, and how architecture actually as a whether profession, practice, or production process and pedagogy is shifted. So maybe there could be scholars who are interested in this trajectory. There are a couple of tracks in that. The second theme is about which are the established technologies now. Now, as in the time period that each one of us can define, the contemporary time, and how these contemporary disruptive technologies, collaborative processes, and what is the development of those technologies with respect to the fields that we are looking at. Sustainable production practices, innovation, and disruptive technologies. The third theme we thought, which is yet it emergent, and which is probably being explored by a lot of other disciplines, and through multidisciplinary dialogues and discourses, it could architecture, planning, and design could reach out to those and those domains. So we are definitely looking at multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary integration and some interesting dialogues. We are hoping that we are receiving research papers, and we are hoping that even the third theme is also addressed. Council of Architecture has taken a lot of efforts in collaborating with AICT, UGC, and other disciplines. Within our campus, we have Ramravati Institute of Technology, which is IT thing, and they also have helped us curating certain sessions as faculty development programs. And we thought it was a very transformative thing even for us as a school, that we are created platform for ourselves to look around. And last was the fourth theme was about looking at various case studies within practices and projects. I'm happy to say Professor Jayashree Deshpande is not here, but she would have loved to. The next slide. She would have definitely would have loved to speak about the previous publication, which is a conference publication, and Taylor and Francis has published it. So we are hoping and we are working towards the conference proceedings of this particular conference also gets published in the similar manner. Next. Call for abstracts has already, the deadline is over, and we will have selection of abstracts by beginning of March, and the deadlines are here. Eventually, conference dates are 26th, 27th, and 28th of June in the campus, in this COE building, which I spoke about. And I'm hoping that all of you come here. I'm definitely going to have Prasad and Architect Lal and Gagandeep. You must come. So we are looking at presentation of research. We are looking at certain international practices to come as keynote speakers. We are also looking at national scholars and practicing people as a plenary speakers, and reading of research papers and panel discussions, and finally a valedictory function for selection of best papers. We are also planning a small exhibition which will exhibit multiple projects, equipment, industry, and for which also Prasad Vaidya is helping us. This is a quick 3-day schedule. We'll come up with the final one. First day being keynote speeches. Second and third day we'll have combination of paper reading plus online speakers, international speakers, offline, in presence, physical presence speakers, discussions, dinners, town hall discussion, valedictory. Next. So this is the campus that we are talking about. It's around, the space is for more than 3,000 students. I have already spoken about it. It has 3 layers. The first layer is institutional, the second layer is 2.5 acres of garden, which is in the middle of the building, the central building, and above that, around 1,500 students accommodation. So these are the places where we congregate, conference halls. Yeah. This advanced academic writing FDP also was conducted by us. so that people who still need a little bit of help in participating were benefited. This was conducted in December. Next. This has been temporarily they were reworking the schedule, but this is the conference NDP I was talking about. We are closely working with the Amravati Institute of Technology, and their faculty are going to be looking at a cross-disciplinary understanding about GIS, robotics, AI, and AR, VR, and of course, people from industry in architecture will be speaking on that. It's a 5-day program. Exhibition I have already spoken about. Yeah, so I think the webinar series, we already had one with Dr. Sanjay Vidyarthi. Do I have to speak more or Mary? Yeah, so these are the dates, upcoming dates. Today we are on the 13th with all the three of you. And the upcoming webinar series is also coming. So Mary will be now starting the panel discussion.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. And
So
welcome.
thank you so much, Aparna ma'am. So now I warmly welcome Architect Prasad Vaidya sir to start with the panel.
Thanks, Mary, and thank you, Aparna. Thank you to the Council of Architecture and the D.Y. Patil School of Architecture. I just want to do a quick time check with Mary. Mary, how long are we going to go with the session?
So for 45 minutes, we can have the panel discussion and 15 minutes question and answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I think as we saw, this session is a lead up to the Transformations 2025 International Conference organized by the Council of Architecture with the D.Y. Patil School of Architecture in Navi Mumbai. And I am Prasad Vaidya. I am the Director of Solar Decathlon India and a Senior Advisor to IIHS and the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy. And my current work includes a mix of research, practice, and teaching. The topic for today's fireside chat styled discussion is actually innovation to address climate change. So this is not a typical panel discussion in that even though I am the moderator, I will be actively contributing to the discussion. So I think Ashok and Gagandeep, we all three of us have talked about the fact that we might have to moderate each other as we speak. So expect perhaps a more sort of a round robin of moderation. For the participants, please feel free to post your questions in the Zoom chat window. We'll try to take them up as we see them and notice them whenever the timing is right. So I'm joined by two change makers in the industry who are transforming buildings and the built environment with their efforts. Gagandeep Bhullar, or Gagan, is an engineer who left a high-powered job with the Boeing company to start Superhuman Race, a data platform that measures good. The Superhuman Race platform is currently being used in about 31 countries by some of the world's most responsible brands. And I'm hoping that Gagan will tell us about how data can be leveraged to drive down carbon emissions and how and why some large developers are actually doing that as their customers. Ashok B. Lal is one of the foremost practitioners of architecture and design based on the principles of environmental sustainability and social responsibility. He's been deeply involved in architectural education since 1990 and has developed curricula and teaching methods to address environmental issues. Ashok is also a mentor to us as a supervisory group member of the Solar Decathlon India. And he engages with us in sort of telling us for the best ways to get academia and industry for innovative collaboration. I am hoping that Ashok will tell us about why new development control regulations are needed for large-scale decarbonization. So I think I just want to set a little bit of a context for the talk and give you the format of what we'll be doing. So the focus of the focus of discussion is related to climate change, which is an unprecedented and existential threat. And building design and operation needs to change to respond to that threat. Why? Well, buildings are intimately related to climate change. Worldwide, buildings result in about 40% energy-related emissions. These emissions come out of energy spent in making embodied energy-intensive building materials and from the generation of electricity that we need to keep these buildings cool and lit up. Especially in our climate. In addition to carbon emissions, poorly designed built environments also contribute to water scarcity, urban heat islands, and loss of biodiversity. So as we experience the accelerating impacts of climate change, like heat waves, storms, and floods, where do we go? We go to buildings for shelter. So they are our first defense, and we need a different way of designing and constructing our built environment. So in today's discussion, the three of us will start by briefly articulating the problem as we see it. And I would like each of us to maybe talk about why we need innovation in the context of the problem and what kind of innovation do we need. We will then talk about the solutions that we are working on individually and collectively to address the problem and how we expect to scale it up. And then each of us will also talk about what are some of the other important innovations that are happening around us and see if we can articulate some problems that need to be solved with the idea that there are those in the audience who might be looking for areas to work in. Maybe they're students, maybe they're researchers, maybe they're practitioners for problems to solve, and maybe some of these discussions can spur those ideas. So with that, I'm going to ask maybe Gagandeep to articulate the first issue here in terms of the problem as we see it and why we need innovation and what kind of innovation we might need. So Gagan, we have close to now 40 minutes to go. So maybe you can take a couple of minutes to take this problem or to take this question.
Prasad, I'm very happy to be in a room of architects. I guess I would be one of the few engineers, but I think that has become commonplace for me now. So in terms of the problem statement, Prasad, when you were introducing me, you talked about the fact that at Superhuman Race, we work with data. And I'm going to articulate the problem from 3 points of view. So the first point of view is the real estate developer's point of view. And the problem for the real estate developer is not that carbon emissions are hard to measure, which is the problem that we solve for them, but it is that carbon is becoming a financial instrument. So if we look across the world, carbon is trading anywhere from $5 a ton to $167 a ton. And because I am the creator of a data platform that is in prolific use today, one of the things that I always start with, especially when I'm speaking to students, is what is data? Data is not a number. Data is a number that has context. And the problem with carbon emissions is that nobody has context regarding these emissions. Nobody has seen a ton of carbon. Nobody knows what a ton of carbon smells like. Nobody knows what that ton of carbon will do if it's sleeping next to them in bed at night, right? So it's something that is extremely abstract, very hard to imagine. And GHG accounting is an evolving discipline which does not have strict rules. It has fluid rules all over the world, right? And so the fact that carbon is becoming a financial instrument and carbon emissions are hard to measure are a problem for real estate developers because it is estimated, and we actually ran some numbers even for small scale constructions in tier 2 or tier 3 cities, where a typical 2 BHK would cost, let's say, 50 lakh rupees. When we ran the numbers in terms of the estimated carbon tax that could be applicable in India in less than 18 months from now, we found that the current rate of taxation for that home, including GST and all other taxes, is at 11%. But the carbon tax could very well be at 12% based on the baseline of emissions that happen today through the developers' choices, which include, like you said, both building materials while they are constructing those homes or those buildings, and also operational emissions as they go along. And then the second side of this problem is, so, okay, if carbon is becoming a financial instrument and I need to solve the problem, obviously there is a higher access to funds that is required. India has been at quite a couple of watershed years, actually, in terms of the money that real estate developers in India were able to raise. So both 2023 and 2024 saw historic levels of fundraising at $5.6 billion and then $8.9 billion. in 2024, which was the highest amount of fundraising that the market was able to do for new construction. But the money comes with strings attached. So 2/3 of this investment actually came from foreign sources. And the requirement to be compliant with ESG standards and to have resilient infrastructure is a requirement. So again, to sort of contextualize that for the students a little bit in terms of what you also said, Prasad, is that the built environment is not only where we go to take shelter, it is also what gets destroyed when extreme climate events happen. So even if we just look at the one geography where economic losses corresponding to the destruction of the built environment have been estimated, trillions of dollars of losses have happened in just the last 5 years in the US, right? Corresponding to wildfires, floods, tsunamis, hurricanes, and so on. So I think that the investors' requirement of, climate resilient infrastructure, better buildings sort of dovetails into that. So I think from my point of view, that's the problem statement that business is faced with today, that carbon is becoming money. And in order to access money, carbon is becoming a gateway. And data that is required to, access that money or estimate what the financial risk to the company would be is very much based on estimation at the moment. It is not attribution based for materials and so on. And so it's a complex problem from the point of view of both measuring the emissions that happen as well as integrating them with business models.
Thanks, Gagan. So what you're doing is you have a data platform, and more importantly, the problem that you're seeing is that while there are investments that are coming to real estates, there is a requirement attached to them that relates to climate, and that's in terms of having more climate resilient buildings that don't get destroyed. Good idea for everybody, and also that the buildings are better performing in general, which probably means that they have less carbon emissions attached to them. So, so this is a growing trend that you're seeing, and you see this as, well, it's a problem, but it's also an opportunity for those who are able to do this kind of work, right? And do this. Thanks. So great. I think now I'm going to ask Ashok to maybe articulate the problem in his own words and his perspective. I think, Ashok, you're on mute.
Yeah, so I'm taking a somewhat different tack from what Gagandeep had just introduced, which was the money-related issues of investments being protected, and also a desire from investors for their buildings or their investments to be a bit more responsible towards the environment by reducing carbon footprint. My attack is that as we see our country urbanize very rapidly, and as we see cities growing very rapidly, more and more people coming to the cities, there is a tendency towards high-rise, high-density type of developments across the board. And in fact, government policies all over the country are beginning to promote that type of development. What we are able to see then, exactly as Gagandeep was pointing out, that whereas the investor is looking for a safety net to protect their investment, the pattern of investment in the big city or in cities generally is actually causing greater and greater risk. That's what's happening. And so I take a step back and I say, my gosh, we really have to think back again, once again, stand at a distance and look at things more out of the box and fundamentally at the same time. Now, the great scientists on climate change have said that, the universal budget per person for carbon emissions is 2.3 tons of carbon dioxide emissions, or equivalent of carbon dioxide emissions per annum for one person. We in India is somewhere around 2 tons. I mean, really taking into account the poorest, the villages and poor communities and all that. average over the whole country, we're at around 2 tons. Singapore is at 7.8 tons per person. If you go to the United States or you go to UAE, it's just, it's skyrocketing, 11, 12, 15 tons per person. It's very, very high. So if we in India, who are growing so rapidly, are going to take care of the world, because we are soon going to be the largest country in the world in terms of population, we'd better not exceed in the building sector. We better not exceed 1 ton per person per annum. Now that's a design ask. And when we look at cities, we see that the taller you go, the higher the embodied carbon. It increases from 4 to 5 story building. The moment you go to about 8, 10 story building, you've increased the embodied carbon by 15%. If you go to 12 to 16 stories, you've increased it by 30% compared to the 4 or 5 story high building. Your operational energy for maintaining that building, the taller one, goes up much more rapidly. And then, as you build more and more dense, as you mentioned, there's urban heat island effect that's happening in the cities. That exacerbation of urban heat island effect calls for more cooling technologies and more cooling energy. So there's something about the structure of cities itself that we have to really think fundamentally about. That's the work that I'm working on right now. Right. And what we're tending to find is that an optimum city, which is 4 to 6 stories tall and can devote much of its roof to catch solar energy and produce electricity, clean electricity. With that kind of pattern, your per capita, including energy transition into distributed energy transition through solar photovoltaics, distributed over the urban structure, not faraway fields, over the rooftops of urban structures, can bring you down to around 0.6 tons per person per annum. Now, if we can get there, gosh, I think we got a solution for the globe, right? We are beginning to compensate for the excesses of the United States and the Emirates, or Singapore for that matter. Now, that's the challenge in front of us. So that's why I'm thinking now, the innovation has to be about the nature of the city itself. And that's the key. If you can develop urban design controls or urban development controls, town planning regulations that produce a form of city where you can get plentiful clean energy off the rooftops and you reduce your embodied carbon and operational carbon in the making and the operation of the building significantly. That's the way I'm looking at it.
Thank you. Articulated very nicely. Thanks, Ashok. And I think Gagan brought up this nice visual of, a ton of carbon sleeping next to us at night. And I was thinking as you were talking that currently we are probably sleeping with 2 tons of carbon at night next to us.
Actually, as Ashok, sorry, go ahead, Prasad.
Go ahead.
I'll pop in after you.
Go ahead. That's fine.
So as Ashok was speaking, I had another interesting visual pop up in my head. So I was seeing that person with like the bubble of 0.6 tons of carbon on their head. But then I was seeing that entire building of 6 floors get to the metro station. And I was wondering, the 0.6 tons on the metro station, who are they attributable to? And then I was seeing that cloud of people go to offices. And then in the office, there's another 0.6 tons of carbon because those buildings get occupied in hours that are when homes are unoccupied, right? And so I was wondering, if we sort of take that approach and, because I'm a data person, I start seeing the whole interconnected data ecosystem as, Ashok was talking. And this was my question to you, Ashok, that, how
Sure.
manage that complexity of the way of life that has evolved in urban spaces today.
Okay, so
yeah.
let me put this in some sort of a perspective. 70% of all buildings in cities are residential buildings. And if you look at the data that's been published by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency on the consumption of energy across the globe in different sectors, and the rise in the consumption of energy, what they're saying is that because residential space in cities is going to grow so much, and they're going to face rising temperatures exacerbated by the city itself, the demand for cooling and other requirements of electricity in the residential sector is rising 3 or 4 times more rapidly and much larger quantum of total energy consumption. 70% is going to be 70-80% is residential, and only 20% is commercial. All right. So also don't forget that of the total population of a city, working population of a city, or population of a city that going out of homes, let's say young people going to schools, people going to work at various places, maybe about 10% actually go to work in offices. The rest of them work in shops, in commercial centers of different kinds, on the street, in schools and colleges and government, institutions of various kinds, police people, and so on and so forth. Only 10% actually go to office. So it's great for the offices to become extremely efficient, and I think they should. And they should be built right on top of metro stations, nowhere else. You come to the metro station, go to the office, come down to the metro station, take the metro and go home. Most efficient, most efficient. And let those centers, metro station centers, which are, piled up offices, 10, 15, 20 stories high, doesn't matter, but let them be 1 or 2 kilometers apart, with parks in between, with housing, with interspersed parks and gardens in between. Don't let them form these megaliths of, and don't let Mumbai take over the world. For God's sake, it's the end of the world. It's not going to survive. It's simply not going to happen.
So Ashok, you're jumping into the solution set already.
Not yet, not yet. I'm just telling you, I'm just warning you that if you don't go the right direction, I'm not talking about solutions. I'm saying if you don't go the right direction, and if you simply follow money, 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 you're going to take the world down with you. That's my message.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think the central idea of the problem that you're stating is that as Gagan started with the idea of financial investments that are driving reduction in carbon, you're positing that the way the investments are driving development itself is causing a vicious circle because it is driving the cities into becoming more high-rise, taller, and therefore more embodied carbon and other sorts of things that are associated with that. Whereas the goal should be to be able to get to a much lower carbon intensity city. And a lot of that can contribute from the buildings that we build and how we build them, the materials that we use. And one of the numbers that you put out there was to try and build at 0.6 tons per capita in terms of the spaces that we occupy and the buildings that we occupy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it leads me to another point. Just to finish, Prasad, I think to pick up Randeep's brilliant idea about carbon trade. So carbon trade also is something that governments are giving out bonds, right? Cities can trade in carbon, right? So when you aggregate the potential of carbon trade at a city scale, your energy transition can be financed, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a big strategy out here, really thinking out of the box. Let's say we can aggregate energy savings, reduction in carbon emissions, and then sell carbon credits, gain money, because the other side of it is energy transition, for which you need investment. Clean energy, whether it is wind, solar, or whatever, whatever other forms are out, even mini, what's it called? Now we're going back to atomic energy once again. So, but that needs a lot of investment. And I think that's one of the big issues for us. So I'm trying to say, what is the connection between strategies for reduction of carbon emissions at the city scale and energy transition?
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm going to articulate the problem from another perspective. And I recently have been working a lot more in the area of education. So I've been looking at the fact that we have close to 5 lakh students that graduate with college degrees related to the built environment every year. 5 lakh students graduating every year with degrees related to the built environment. Almost none of them are trained on how to use their expertise and skills to reduce emissions, to make climate resilient buildings, ensure climate justice, the kinds of things that Ashok, you were talking about, or to make use of the kind of data that Gagan, you were talking about. Most coursework simply hasn't changed to our needs related to climate change. And I see this as a part of a vicious circle. Building owners, renters, buyers currently don't see value and don't demand climate responsive buildings, other than maybe some of the small sliver of investors that Gagan talked about. And so most developers don't make those kinds of buildings. So therefore, the job market doesn't demand it, and our colleges aren't teaching how to make the built environment climate resilient or climate sensitive. In fact, I'll posit here that over 80% of the technologies and know-how that we use in our buildings today hasn't changed in the last 70 years. And this, I think, is where innovation is needed, because if we are to make this change, not only do we need newer technologies and know-how, but we also need an innovation in the way we are addressing curriculum and training and teaching people who are going to be building the built environment that will last in the next 100 years or so. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'd like to maybe move on to the second part of our discussion here, which is each of you and I will do maybe describe what you're doing in addressing the problem that you identified. So we go in the same order again, Gagan and then Ashok and then me.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of the problem that I identified, which is in fact the developer's problem, but it is also the widest impact spectrum today that is resulting in assets that are being developed, leading the change. So from that point of view, I think the first part of the solution that we recognized was A, making the data visible, and 2, making it very easy for people to consume the data and then use it for decision making. So again, going back to the core sort of argument, Ashok, between you and me. So Ashok talked about and touched on the fact that, this needs to be led from the point of view of, doing the right thing and not just money. But in my experience, both in business, I used to be at the Boeing company, so completely different discipline, but still business is business everywhere, profit is profit everywhere. What I've seen is that all decisions in all boardrooms get taken based on money. And that's just the currency of the world that we live in, fortunately or unfortunately. And what we found is that when carbon emissions and all the decarbonization levers or all the sources of carbon get translated into carbon risk, it's very easy for companies to move the needle. So as an example, I'll actually share with you. In fact, I'll share a few examples. So we've been talking about building materials. And for one of the real estate developers that we work with, a few years ago, for one of the cluster of projects that they were making, they were consuming huge amounts of glass. The design was already set. And these were buildings that had green certifications. So clearly the fact that accurate data continuously throughout the process of construction as well as operations is not part of our green certification process today is an opportunity for improvement that needs to be integrated in the ecosystem as a whole. But I think the other issue was that because the design was set, the consumption of glass could not be modified. It was so great, in fact, that as architects, when I tell you the numbers, so in terms of the emissions from glass compared to even steel or RMC in those years, in that particular year, it was 2x in terms of just the emissions from glass. So 43% of their total emissions as a company came from the consumption of glass that they had on some of these projects. But it could not be something that they could have worked on. However, the data becoming visible made a low-hanging fruit visible to them, which was the fact that glass was also being transported over a large distance. So haulage is a problem that could be fixed because, like I said, the sources of carbon, obviously the majority resides in the material, but a minority of that also resides in the transportation of that material, which is still based on vehicles that are using fossil fuels. And we don't have biodiesel, we don't have electric vehicles in transportation that are at scale today. And so that is something that they were able to fix right away. What was the motivation to fix that? So the fact that they saved maybe 1 million or so ton of emissions from the local sourcing was not the motivation. The motivation was that they would save 3 CR in renegotiating with the supplier in terms of which site the glass came from. That was the motivation. That is what moved the needle. That is what made the decision. I'll give you another example from a different industry. So with another client of ours that is an owner-operator of commercial buildings, they were trying to access a sustainability-linked loan from one of the large global sort of investor organizations. And because it was a sustainability-linked loan, the benefit to them is that if they, let's say, access 1,000 CR in loan terms, they would save 50 CR over 5 years, which is, again, a good amount of savings, right? But the condition is that existing buildings which are 10 years or older need to be made more efficient, right? So again, the motivation to make that old existing building efficient in terms of either retrofitting the building or making sure that, low-hanging fruit is addressed. So for example, some of the things that they did right away was green leasing with some of their clients, right? So they realized that there were clients that were using commercial office spaces as data centers. And the reason why it's a problem is because now you're adding capacity, which you should not be adding because there is a different typology of building that is built to serve that type of need, right? And so adding capacity in an existing office building really doesn't make any sense from that point of view. It'll only result in losses over time. And so green leasing was an immediate approach that they took, which was the business decision. But they also started looking at what are the equipment that can be calibrated, that can be maintained better, that will result in savings. Are there these variable motors that can be put and so on? So I think the point here is that in the solution set that we deliver, we make the impact visible to them. We convert the impact in monetary terms. So we say that we work at the climate money nexus. And that conversion in money terms is what moves the needle in terms of the impact actually getting delivered to the ecosystem. And in terms of the final piece that I touched on from the problem statement with investors putting money, we also realized that there was a new type of interpretation that we could get from the data sources that we were looking at. So we were looking at over 150 different data sources from all over the world: satellite data, weather station data, local data in terms of climate, because climate is not a national or state-built topic. It's a very, very local topic. We have microclimatic zones locally and there are 3 reservoirs of carbon. So when we started looking at the data sets, we actually realized that even with investors, there will be a paradigm shift in how we see the climate problem and we see investments going forward in the future. Today, investors are investing in assets. And maybe that is not the right answer. Maybe the right answer is investing in assets, but also keeping a percentage of the investment out of the 100 that they are investing in an asset. Maybe they need to keep 5 or 3 or 2 or 1 for building resilience locally, for not destroying forests, which is something that is now, rampant across the globe despite the deep understanding of the climate issue, or not destroying ocean ecosystems, which is again a problem that is rampant around the world, even though we understand that these are the 3 reservoirs of carbon that we have, and if we maximize atmospheric carbon, we put ourselves at greater risk of extreme climate events. So, now we're also making that data visible to investors easily, where they can see what is the anomaly in a location and how do they contribute in terms of keeping their own assets safe by setting aside a percentage of the investment for building local resilience. So that's sort of the solution set that we are working on.
Thanks, Gagan. I maybe just for the to help the audience, because I think you're not an IT audience or a data science audience here. You had a startup, and how long have you had it? And maybe just very briefly talk about how you went about setting up a business that was related to buildings and carbon while coming from a very different background.
That's a very good question. So we've been doing this for 8 years now. When I started the company in 2016, a lot of people thought I was really stupid. Some early investors I met told me that we hope you've not quit your job, because I was at Boeing in a very high-powered job, and they were like, nobody pays for these, snake charmer-like concepts of measuring good. So clearly it was not something that anyone thought could be done scientifically. I think the approach that we took, so why did we focus on the built environment? The reason why we focused on the built environment is that at the end of the day, what really distinguishes us in the most significant way from any other animal community is that we reside in the built environment. We like buildings, right? Whether it is to work, to sleep, even to play. Like we have these sporting, arenas, and everything is part of the built environment today. We like to build roads where no roads exist so that we can go to places, right? And so we thought that the built environment had the most diverse set of, sources of carbon in a way, and it also is the largest beneficiary of emissions. As we started working on the built environment, we also started realizing that within the building and material space. So how did we start working with this? We basically got approached by a few real estate developers when they saw what we had built, because they thought they could start sharing the data with investors. So having control on the data is something that is important to anyone. The fact that, when due diligence of companies happen and your stock data, your performance data it's all in the public domain, but you know that it's linked to the accounting that has happened in-house gives you confidence. For carbon, that was not the case. So there was a lot of conjecture-driven decisions that were happening. And so having control and being able to share investor dashboards was probably the first reason why developers started talking to us. Over time, they started realizing that when work stoppages happen, so when there are air pollution concerns in a city, the developer gets a notice saying "Kaam band kar do," like you can't continue to build anymore because the city has high pollution. But they started realizing at their own data that while construction activity contributes to some emissions, maybe like less than 5%, 95%, more than 90% will come from construction materials. So, how do we decentralize that responsibility? How do we decarbonize steel, cement, and glass? How do we take actions that build the innovation ecosystem to support that decarbonization? So Ashok also talked about electrification and alternate sources of energy. If we actually look at the current state today, what will it take to decarbonize steel? World Economic Forum says that the top 3 opportunities, one is energy efficiency, but the other is electrification and hydrogen. And where are we on those? Like we are at 150th and 850th in terms of the capacity needed till 2050, right? So, and there are huge investment sinks. So we started thinking about how do we make this data visible and make it actionable with low-hanging fruit, delivering quick results for them as a starting point.
Great, thanks. Thanks. I think one of the things that you said, which I think will be interesting for this audience, is that you said that the built environment has a diversity of carbon in it, various different sources, various different quantities. And I think climate science people and those who are working on mitigation consider the built environment to be a hard to abate sector, because they really think that driving action in buildings is very difficult. So with with that thought of the difficulty, I'm going to ask now, Ashok, what are you doing to make these cities become resilient and low carbon?
Yeah, to answer your question directly first, is that when we ask ourselves this question about the possibility of what we might call low carbon urban futures for an urbanizing India, we set up a project, and you are one of our advisors on the project, in which we are examining simultaneously on parallel tracks several things. We are looking at the carbon emissions produced by different intensities of building or different intensities of land use, and comparing them one with the other. We are then finding which of these, so if you have, say, right from an FSI of 1.5 up to SFI of about 4, the floor area ratio, FAR of 4, when we compare all of these in respect of their carbon emissions, operational and embodied, as well as the impact on urban heat island effect, as well as the impact on the mobility and transportation around the buildings, we begin to find there is an optimum that occurs at a certain FSI, which is around 1.5, 1.8. It seems to be like that. So we are doing this very systematically, and then we are checking this against the existing natures of dense cities across the country and their historical patterns of growth and their emerging patterns of growth. Making sure that if you were to work around with these FSIs or these FARs, will we have the requisite land around the cities as they begin to grow for their population to increase, say, to double their populations, still keeping cities reasonably compact? So that's another check that's being done. We're also checking on what are the policy and regulatory mechanisms through which, right, this can be implemented or managed. How can policy say that we are working towards low carbon urban futures? How does that translate into town planning regulations or town planning principles and urban development control regulations? So we look at that also. We also look at legal provisions and other instruments of governance that enable such things to take place, and what will be the mechanisms for achieving that. So that's the project that we are working on. And whatever the results, I mean, it will be put out for everybody to look at, but it's really trying to make a roadmap to somehow contain the explosion of carbon emissions that would happen if we don't think about it and go to high density, high rise, high carbon emission cities. We are in trouble then. So that's the work we are doing. But I just want to respond to one more thing about costs. Our experience in building design has shown clearly that if you get your basic building right, you can make it very sexy, very attractive, very pleasant, beautiful place to work in or to live in. Your overall cost of building with proper environmental control, so air conditioning when you need it, lighting when you need it, etc., all of those things put in, is actually no more expensive, or in fact, sometimes even cheaper than the buildings that investors have got locked into as an image. So I would suggest that one data we have to share is not the carbon emissions that you can save in what you're doing now, but what is the level of carbon emissions that you need not exceed if you follow certain principle of design. That's the data we need to really share. And then make a competition around that. Look, so-and-so has done it. My gosh, what a fantastic place it is. It's got the highest rental, lowest carbon emissions. Wow. That's the competition we need to set up.
Well, speaking of competition.
Yes, that's where you come.
Yeah. But before we get to competition, I guess this is a very strong and powerful message that you have given at the end, which is that you can make a building with all the things that you need, and perhaps most of the things that you want without trying to splurge on everything. And it can be very pleasant and good to work in. And it will be environmentally responsible, and it will not cost any more than a typical building. And at the same time, to be on the other end of the spectrum, you're working on a roadmap where development control regulations and rules will enable us to be able to contain and manage the carbon intensity of our cities. And this is the research type of project that you're working on, which is
Right.
grounded in real city data, right? Yeah.
Right.
Coming back to this notion of competition, which is where I am at. The problem that I had stated was the fact that we are not training the students and we are not educating for climate change. And I am not the Council of Architecture and I am not the AICTE, so I couldn't make a top-down curriculum change. But I decided to break the vicious cycle through some level of student participation by exciting the students to get educated by themselves voluntarily. We didn't go around changing this curriculum. Instead, we introduced Solar Decathlon India, which is a student challenge. And it is a learning program because it has a very distinct pedagogy of a low floor and a high ceiling learning environment. And let me just speak a little bit about that. So what is a low floor learning environment in this context? A low floor learning environment means that a student doesn't feel restricted or doesn't feel that there's a hurdle to cross before you can start learning. And in Solar Decathlon India and in the challenge, we allow any college level student to participate. So even though it is a challenge on making net zero buildings, it does not require to be an architect or a civil engineer or even an engineer to participate and have ideas on making buildings better. We provide all the learning content online, and then there are other resources and mentors and simulation tools that students who participate get access to. So in a sense, with all of these resources provided, it becomes a flipped classroom model where when a faculty guide is working with the students and guiding them, he or she doesn't have to teach them the content. Instead, the faculty member gets to guide the students to work excitingly on solving the design problem. The learning is what the students can do either at home or in a different environment in the classroom by going through it themselves. And the exciting part of the work becomes how do you apply this learning? So that's sort of the low floor, no barrier to entry and resources provided so that you get time to work on these things and the teachers have more time to spend with the students. What is the high ceiling then? When we say it's a high ceiling learning environment, typically it means, and in math classroom, it means that students of different levels are able to work on different levels of problems of complexity. In Solar Decathlon India, which is a building design situation, it's a competition. So in the high ceiling simply means that because it's a competition, you are empowered and you're required to excel, which means that you can go to any level of performance that you want in terms of your design. And the 10 contests of the competition are really, really tough. Even most professionals who have been working in the industry for 15, 20 years would not be able to address all the requirements of the competition. Plus, it requires teamwork and group work, which is not something that we train college students to do. We tell them that your assignment should be done by yourself, and if you're doing it in a group, then you won't be graded fairly and all of that. No, in Solar Decathlon India, it's a competition that has to be done as a team because climate resilient buildings have to be built as teams with multiple disciplines. It cannot be a problem that is solved by one person with one discipline. And you have to design for a real client. So students find all of this very exciting and challenging, and that sort of makes it a very high ceiling learning environment where you can do lots of things and experiment with lots of stuff. And then, why are students doing it? Well, obviously they're doing it to win, to excel, to see how well you can do, to experience the team spirit and the collaboration, to get the thrill of working for a real client or real project. But they also get to learn the latest technologies and skills that you need to make these net zero buildings. And Ashok, you talked about the fact that you have to it is possible to make these buildings in a way that are not expensive, no more expensive. And I think in Solar Decathlon India, we find students who estimate costs, and whether they are right or wrong, they are making an effort to be able to do exactly what you said, which is demonstrate how a creative design solution can be made without any additional costs, and it performs as a net zero building. So I think that's kind of the place which has been exciting for them. And a lot of the work is data driven, which is how sort of it comes back to what Gagan was talking about. Evidence-based design, you have to know your numbers, you have to know your costs, you have to know your performance, and it really sort of sets a different mindset for the students to work on. I think that it's been scaling really well. So far, we've had 300 colleges that have participated. 8,000 students have been through Solar Decathlon India in the last 5 years. And there are some 300 developers, consultants, manufacturers who are partnering with the students, and all of them, including the students, not just the students, but all of these industry players also are learning about net zero buildings. So they're having these conversations. And I think to me, that's a big change that can happen in the building industry because of conversations that the students are bringing about. And one of the other things that is really exciting is that last year, more than 40% of the colleges that were participating actually included Solar Decathlon India into their coursework, into their curriculum. So this is sort of organically happening. And to me, that's the sign of something that is scaling up by itself, that is gaining more participation. So I think my way of thinking about it is that the structures that are there in the current education system are very strong to change top down. And it's much easier to sort of, work through those structures and find where the holes are and fill those holes with good students, good industry, good experts, and explore new solutions. So that's where I'm at. And I want to turn to Ashok a little bit, and maybe your experience in terms of teaching students and the interaction with students that you had over the number of years in academia.
Yeah, so, well, I mean, before we got the highly developed tools for being able to do all the number work as you're designing and checking things out because of simulation and techniques of calculation, etc. Before that, we knew the principles of energy efficient or climate responsive design, and we knew the principles of utilizing those materials which need less energy in their conversion from the natural state to a building material product. So we knew the principles. And what I find really works is that if you've got the basic fundamentals of the impact of construction and materials on environment, more or less understood, if you've got the basic fundamentals of building physics are well understood, which is, cooling requirements and so on, environmental control, then what needs to happen is that the strategies of designing should become your second nature. Just like, spatial planning for a good architect is a second nature. It doesn't take long for somebody to work out, a university layout plan or a school layout plan or a hospital layout plan because they know how to organize space so well. But they also know at the moment quite well simultaneously how to make sure that the buildings are going to stand up. They have a sense of the structure of the building. Now, if they had a sense of the environmental impact of how they're building, if they had a sense of the configuration of the building as a response to climate, right, then that becomes second nature to design. And it happens very swiftly. And then you use the tools to improve performance by measurement, make it more optimal, cost against performance and so on. And I think that aspect of building it into your design studio as if it's second nature is yet to happen. And I think that's where we need to talk to all our students and our faculty to really turn this around.
Great, great. Thanks. So, Gagan, I think I'm going to ask you here. You've been moving around in the startup ecosystem and probably have been with all the people who call themselves founders and co-founders and a bunch of investors. What are some of the interesting innovations that you've been seeing from startups that have been coming up that may be related to climate change and specifically climate change in the built environment? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think there are some interesting movements. So I'll talk about a few that I think are interesting. And I also have a question for both of you in terms of why some of these don't scale at a broader level. Is it because of what you talked about as a problem statement, Prasad, that students may be just not aware as they start out as architects? But what I'm seeing as exciting, and these problems, the problems that they are solving are very relevant for building owners. So for example, one of the most exciting ones that I've seen recently is where they have almost like a drone-based robotic monitoring of site. And typically these construction sites would be monitored by 5-6 different project managers who would record, the entry of materials and then the actual construction phase and all of that. But the moment you start doing it using technology, I think that you also start interpreting the data in very interesting ways. So both defects as well as overuse of estimated materials, because the estimation is coming from a system and the actual inflow is coming from a system and the building of the structure is also coming from a system. So all the wastage and defects. So this is actually using computer vision that they are doing it. And I think it's exciting because then it just keeps creating an automated map of the ecosystem. I think what this could and should blend with now, which is a much bigger problem. So a lot of the built ecosystem that exists around the world today is built already, right? And we don't know whether it is built as designed. And I think that is a problem statement that a lot of the owners struggle with, because sometimes in order to find out what was actually leaking or what was the root cause, they'll end up breaking 4 walls instead of, just fixing that one root cause somewhere because of which the seepage is happening, or, some shots are happening in that area. So I think that is, and then also in fuels. But I think my question to you is that as I hear about structural cooling, radiant cooling, and I hear about the amazing impact it delivers, I would want to understand, Prasad, from you and maybe even from you, Ashok, why are large commercial developers that are building mass housing not able to integrate this, or large commercial offices, why are they not able to integrate the cooling solutions when we know that a majority of the building's footprint resides in fact in cooling in countries like India?
Okay. A very specific question related to a technology. I've gotten a signal here also about the fact that we need to wrap up this discussion to be able to take questions from the audience. So Gagan, I think Ashok and I will take this question in case there are no questions coming from the audience. I'll keep it on in my notes over here, and Ashok, you can also. I think Ashok has left the meeting. Okay. In that case, it's my responsibility to answer the question. But we'll take it as we go. Yes. Any questions coming from the audience? You can either put your questions in the chat window, or you can raise your hand, and then I think speak up, unmute yourself and speak up. Either way works.
So I encourage all of you to think critically, challenge ideas, and contribute to your perspectives. Please ask questions.
Yeah. Am I audible? Can I ask? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, we were sitting in the same room, so I think it was echoing.
That's okay.
So I have specific questions for all three of you, one by one, if it's okay. My first question to Ashok sir is, uh, how do we bring the idea of, where we have so dynamics in our habitats. We have land use which comprises 50 of the land use which comprises of residential use, with small pockets of, buildings and small pockets of development. How do we bring the owners to the owners? How do we say that owners need to contribute a lot into a sustainability module? I know DCRs are there, policies are there, but what kind of discussion should erupt out of this? Can I just move on with the questions one by one?
Yeah, you can read out the questions. We'll also decide how much time we have.
Gagandeep, for me, in case of investment, I am looking that again, we have this kind of typologies where there are small time investors looking at small time development, and owners really have the aspiration to change themselves. One. Second is you will find a lot of investment where the heat island effects are usually the lowest, and you find the highest amount of investment going there because there is a lot of land, a lot of space. At that point of time, how do you think that investors should process themselves and look at, even when we look at these small investments, and they are high, but they are still at small scale, because this composites to a large amount of carbon footprint and heat island effects. And Prasad sir, for you, uh, with the growing, with the faster amount of development that is, looked at, that we need to kind of follow RERA, we need to kind of follow this system where we have to construct, and materials that are used are supposed to be building fastest buildings. At that point of time, how do we bring the sustainability quotient into the materials and then say that, okay, this is possible for us to develop? So there is city-wide, there is investment-wide, and there is plot-wide kind of question. Sorry, I had to kind of ask this to all three of you.
Okay. Sounds good. Ashok, did you hear the question for you? Yeah, you're on mute. Yeah, so let's try
I heard the last question just now. Yeah.
Okay. So the question to you was, apart from the DCRs and the regulations that we talk about, how do we bring this decision making related to climate change, reducing carbon, etc., to the level of the individual buyer or home builder? And I think, right, is that right? Yeah. Okay. So that was the question for you. And I'm going to ask each of us to take very short answers or give very short answers on this.
Well, shall I start?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think if you were to take the analogy of the changes in dietary habits that we are seeing across the middle classes of India today, because people are beginning to see that their diet has something to do with their health, and especially their longevity and the exposure to all kinds of lifestyle diseases. You take that analogy and then you build a story around that analogy of a home, of a place of work, right? Which is about feeling good, well-being, and then being participants in the making of a town, a city, or set of homes which promote feeling good and well-being. And that it's a shared journey. I think those are the stories we have to build for people to simply say, yes, why can't we have it? Of course we can have it. But, give me something which is really beautiful. Now that's architectural skill. And I don't see why it can't be done. I think it's the question of how you tell those stories. And on top of that, if it can be shown to be economical, well, nothing better than this. Right? If you want to splash money, I'd say go to Switzerland during the summer.
Yeah, thanks, Ashok. Gagan, the question to you about the investments.
Yes, so actually, this is a very good question, Mayuresh, and this is happening even today. So this is not something about the future, the question that you're asking. Plotted homes, larger constructions, and cities, all the things that we talked about. If we actually look at the spectrum, so where does a plotted home raise money from? It raises money from a bank. Banks have, and where do banks raise money from? They raise it from IFC, World Bank, and so on, right? Now, where does EWS housing money come from? Like the Deen Dayal Awas Yojana or the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, that comes through a subsidy that comes from the government. Where do governments raise money from? They raise money from IMF, World Bank, and so on, right? And then where do the Godrej Properties and the Prestiges and the Lodhas that are building mass housing, which is sometimes premium and sometimes, affordable, where are they raising money from? They are raising money from investors, and where are investors raising money from? Sovereign funds and World Bank and so on, right? So at the end of the day, just like emissions in an ecosystem are connected, like I talked about when I was talking about that 0.6 tons and, moving to spaces and how does that do for the individual's impact? Similarly, money is also connected across the ecosystem. So the moment you go to a bank today, and they are not reporting on their financed emissions, they will give money to any home that is being constructed in any way. But 5 years down the line, when their investors say that I need to see your scope 3 or financed emissions, they are going to ask you to use better materials. They are going to ask you to be efficient, because now the carbon on your books, which does not exist as of today for many people that are raising money from, let's say, the RRBs, will become relevant because it'll become the carbon on their books, and it'll impact their ability to raise capital, to sustain in business and so on. So I think that's sort of the very short answer to your question.
Thanks, Gagan. So I'll take this question, Mayuresh, on, we are looking at faster development happening. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but that's what's happening. And how are we going to respond with technologies related to those? What I'm actually looking at, and I have been seeing this, now for the last 3 years or so, is that in our building ecosystem of innovation, there are a lot of startups who are actually working on low carbon materials and technologies that can be, they're lighter blocks, they can be processed faster. There are also people who are working on drone technologies to be able to monitor construction and find where you can have some savings, etc. There's a lot of work that is happening, but more or less investors, especially fund investors, are looking to put their money into software related solutions because they are easy to scale up, and anything that is bricks and mortar is harder to scale up because it just requires more infrastructure to make. You need a workshop, you need a factory to be able to make these things. And a startup requires a lot more investment to be able to do that kind of work as opposed to scaling up software. So one of the things that I am working on is to making investors aware, because there are investors who are impact investors who are aware of climate change and making the right kind of investments. I am making them aware of the fact that unless they start investing in hard tech, which is related to bricks and mortar, we are not going to be able to meet the climate change goals. So you have to have a portfolio of investments. And just like your portfolio that's related to risk of investment, you have to have a portfolio related to what impact you want to have. And making them aware of that so that they can start putting more money into where it's needed also. Yeah. Great. Thanks for that question.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, anybody else? Aparna, you have a question?
Yes. I thought I should not ask, or I should let others ask. But more than a question, I felt one thing what architect Ashok Lal spoke about, that yes, becoming environmental impact as a second nature to design process is required to be done. Although in educational environment, I think the urgency is felt at every level, whether when we are working at a first year, second year, at 5-year course, the urgency is felt in our day-to-day conversations. We do talk about the urgency and we push students there, but yes, the pedagogies need to evolve. I completely agree with you. The curriculums are a structure, but pedagogies definitely can step up and transform things. So there is something that maybe, I would like to connect with you and Prasad and Gagandeep, and maybe we can do. And you've already been doing, so I'm quite now enthused by today's conversation. That's one thing. The second thing, what you spoke about, is about how urban forms can actually be researched upon and optimized through various things by simple forms. materiality, and to control those having certain, regulations in place. So it's very interesting. So again, we would like to have your inputs, and whenever you find time and when we invite you, we would like to understand, and that is a step forward in creating this second nature in terms of how we have we have Professor Anil Paude. He just got his PhD and he's our structural engineer. So right now he's the only one who looks at the structural stability, and those aspects are becoming as a second nature. What I've also felt when you're looking at urban form, I think there is a lot of money and design activity happens in indoors, which is a lot of interior design, lot of products, and lot of things happen. And probably I have not really researched the amount of money that is invested in those. Probably could be higher than the material that we see from the outside as an architectural thing. So, and there's absence of even policies and regulations there. Yes, through the rating systems, it is looked at from inside out and outside in. But in overall operation, practice, and project and production, there are no regulations. So that is something, an area that we all we can work on. And so these are the observations, and I would like you to reflect on these, whether I'm thinking right or whether you have already done studies which you can share. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, a brief response to what you're saying, picking up on what Prasad was talking about innovation and investment in innovation. Investment in innovation. One of the things that we can do collectively is to help students, faculty, define opportunities and problems where innovation will be very useful, right? And make that a student program. Think out of the box, try something out, make something happen. And when you build a history of attempts, you build upon each other's knowledge historically, you reach a stage where an investor can be invited. But it must start at the university. I think that's a great opportunity there.
Yeah, and Ashok, I think I want you to know that Aparna here has a master's in design, which is sort of industrial product design, and I think she probably understands what you're saying very acutely. So Aparna, this notion that Ashok talked about, where you're having a student program that is related to innovation. I do think that with the way you are taking up the D.Y. Patil School of Architecture with integration of design and art and architecture is a good environment, because we cannot innovate and do designs at the building level because they take a very long time to fructify, and you cannot go through the iterative cycle that you need for getting the design right. So in an innovation cycle, if you are able to bring in product design problems even into the architectural students, they will learn a certain kind of methodology which you are familiar with, that I think we need in this environment.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you for articulating it. I will continue to work on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we are drawing to a close. We're past the time. I'm just going to take a couple of moments to summarize. I think that what our group has been able to talk about today was the fact that an opportunity is getting created for professionals who will work on the built environment and climate change because of the nature of investments. This is the point that Gagan made. And I think Ashok has given us a caution that we also need to make sure that at the larger or sort of a macro level, this drive of investments doesn't end up becoming sort of a rebound problem where you're reducing emissions on one hand, but on the other hand, you're increasing the overall quantity of emissions by the kind of buildings that are being encouraged by the investments. And then I think the Aparna's whole points that she brought about the need for change in pedagogy, I think is something that I was talking about, and the innovation that is needed to make our future generations be able to deal with climate change is very important. And the only place that can happen is in academic institutions, because they are the only part of society that are future thinking and not always responding to the market. So I think with that as a very brief summary, I'll turn it back to Mary or Aparna. And thank you, Gagan and Ashok, for a very nice discussion today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Gagandeep, Ashok, Lal sir, and Prasad Vaidya sir for the insightful conversation on innovation to address climate change. We truly appreciate your valuable sites. The discussions on climate money nexus, the climate conscious policies, and role of student participation have shed light on some of the most pressing challenges of our time. So now, on behalf of Council of Architecture and D.Y. Patil School of Architecture, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Gagandeep, Ashok Lal, and Prasad Vaidya, and to our co-convener of the conference, Professor Aparna Surve, Dean, D.Y. Patil School of Architecture, as well as all our participants for taking the time to join us today. Before leaving the meeting, I would like to invite you all to register for the next webinar. So the webinar topic is From Lab to Market, Bridging Academic Research and Industrial Applications with 3D Printed Concrete. It's scheduled on 27th of January, 2025. Dr. Ashish Mohite, CTO and co-founder of Hyperion Robotics, will be talking. So I invite all of you to register for this webinar. Thank you. So it's in the month of February. There is a type correction. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye bye. Thank you and bye bye.
Bye.
Bye, Gagan. See you later.
Yes. See
Bye,
you,
Prasad.
Ashok.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye,
Okay.
Prasad. Bye, Dr. Aparna.
Bye. I can't leave. Everybody has to leave, then I say go chair. How do I do it?
Ma'am,
Huh?
like last time, was this streamed on YouTube, this event also? I had an exam duty, so I could not actually log in time.
Last time?
It is there.
It is there in the YouTube. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, I'll just look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.